I now give the floor to the Attorney-General and Minister for Economy, Civil Service and Communications, the Honourable Aiyaz Sayed-Khaiyum. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank His Excellency and stand in support of the Honourable Prime Minister's motion to thank His Excellency for his most gracious address on the official opening of the 2019-2020 session of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, sir, the tradition is that when His Excellency the President gives his opening statement in Parliament, the members of Parliament speak after him, talk on His Excellency's speech, as the speech lays out the government's plans for the year and indeed the government's philosophical outlook, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, His Excellency the President talked not only about our Constitution, but about the focus areas of government, and indeed he talked about nation building. Nothing in His Excellency's speech or his statement was untrue word, nor is it a departure from the conventions that have been set out and carried out since independence, where sitting governments, through the head of state, gives a statement laying out government's plans for the year. Mr. Speaker, sir, but what we have seen is that the opposition members have not only chosen, beginning from the leader of opposition, which is completely unbecoming of him. However, we've become accustomed to him making unbecoming statements, Mr. Speaker, sir, and indeed engaging in many unbecoming actions right from 1987 when he became Prime Minister under the racist 1990 Constitution. His term in office saw the escalation of enormous levels of corruption, collapse of the National Bank, the unbecoming behavior of him when he was Prime Minister in more ways than one, and of course, Mr. Speaker, sir, his subsequent actions post-1999. Mr. Speaker, sir, he implicitly and explicitly berated, and so did his members of his opposition, berated His Excellency the President. At no stage, Mr. Speaker, sir, if they had any objection, if they had any reasons to disagree with His Excellency the President, they have at no stage since Monday given a viable alternative, Mr. Speaker, sir. They have not given an iota of alternative philosophical outlook for this country, an iota of sound economic policies, an iota of sound policies that will deliver better and improved services for all Fijians, an iota of inclusiveness. If you see, most of the statements have been completely not inclusive at all, exclusive. An iota of implementation. How do we implement civil, political and socio-economic rights, Mr. Speaker, sir? There's not only a bankruptcy in the ideas or the lack of ideas by the opposition, there appears to be a moral and ethical bankruptcy too, inaptitude. There's been a failure, as demonstrated throughout the week, of the opposition to grasp some very basic fundamental ideas and philosophies. We have Honourable Nawai, unfortunately who's not here, who says on social media that the reason why government will stop students from getting subsidized cards during the school holidays is because we don't have any money. When the purpose of the card, of the blue card, is for students to go to school, if there's no school, obviously there's no card. It's very logical, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, that is what you call prudent management. This is the kind of obtuse and nonsensical statements that we are getting, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, sir, we had also somebody else from the other side, I think is Honourable Gerengere Tumbua, who talked about government borrowing money from FNPF, and I'll try and focus on the economic and financial parts of these statements. Mr. Speaker, sir, FNPF has been lending money to the Ratumara government, the Rambuka government, the Chaudhry government, the Garase government, the Bainimarama government, and the Fiji First government. There's absolutely nothing untoward about that. What she doesn't understand, Mr. Speaker, and fail to grasp in a very pedestrian approach to economic fundamentals, is that superannuation funds need to lend money, need to invest money. So you find FNPF building buildings, they lend money, they buy bonds, not only in Fiji but offshore. Why? Because they get a return. When they get a return on those funds, then your value of your funds goes up. That's why till today, we have one of the highest rates of returns in FNPF, Mr. Speaker, sir. The other point, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that, again, the pedestrian sort of knowledge of economics was applied, they said, was that apart from the fact that FNPF has now won international awards, they are saying that FNPF is not doing the right thing. Mr. Speaker, sir, I would accept her proposition if FNPF was lending to us at non-market rates, if we were getting discounted rates. They are most certainly lending to us at market rates. The other thing they said was that We are borrowing onshore only because we can borrow from FNPF. Anybody who has a sound basis or knowledge of economics would know that it is always better to have debt onshore than to have debt offshore. You can have some offshore debts. The reason why you have onshore debts, Mr. Speaker, sir, is because you are not then vulnerable to foreign currency fluctuations. If you borrow offshore in US dollars, if tomorrow the value of US dollar goes up, your debt may jump from $50 million to $70 million. You get certainty in borrowing onshore from banks, financial institutions, FNPF being one of them. So again, Mr. Speaker, sir, this is the level of contribution that we've had from the opposition. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I also wanted to make is that there are other superannuation funds throughout the world. You go to Australia, the return rate is about 3%, 2.5%. They also invest offshore, they also invest in banks, they also lend money. So there's nothing untoward about what they're doing. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I wanted to make was, we have our A350, the first one is going to land at about 12:30 p.m. this Saturday. It's a very proud moment, Mr. Speaker, sir, because we are the first country in the South Pacific to get an A350. Now, apart from the fact it's the largest aircraft, apart from the fact it's got lower carbon footprint, it burns less fuel to get longer distances, it has far more business class seats, it gives a much better product for us to be able to market and be able to fly to longer destinations like maybe Chicago, to India, to Thailand and various other places, non-stop, which means we'll get more tourists coming in, getting to main catchment areas, flying to Dallas where the American Airlines is based. All of these positive things are done. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'd like to also publicly acknowledge the Fijian rugby players who were in France, Mr. Speaker, sir. Many of them who were able to get away from the training turned up. We had a session the night before. They turned up for the traditional ceremony we had when the handing of the plane took place. They turned up with their friends. They turned up with their families, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I want to acknowledge them because they were also very proud. We were also very proud that they participated. We had social media posts. Everybody's commenting, saying what a wonderful thing, proud to be a Fijian, Fijians from all over the world. Amidst all of this, Honorable Rasova puts up a post. He says, amidst all of this, and this is a man who I understand has worked in the travel industry. He says, ISA, Fiji Airways, some of your laws on tickets are non-refundable and non-transferable. Hundreds of thousands of dollars ripped off by your company over the years, making you filthy cash rich and poor poorer. And he does an emoticon like this. He does an emoticon like this. It's the most vulgar emoticon we can do. It's here. Mr. Speaker, sir, this, Honorable Rasova, please don't laugh. It's not it is a serious matter. This is the level of contribution we now see from the opposition. When the entire country are young people, everybody in the travel industry is proud, we get these kind of comments. Why? Because the opposition is not used to the idea of being in the opposition. They do not know how to remodel themselves to be an effective opposition. That is the problem, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, again, I wanted to say, I'll come to that very soon. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Walker's entire statement almost was replete with ethnic analysis. Mr. Speaker, sir, you cannot run a modern nation state on the basis of ethnic division. You cannot get good economic sense through economic division. The leader of opposition, after 87, tried his M-call, I think it was called, through FDB. The Garcia government tried the blueprint. We know what the realities were after that. They were monumental failures. Who bought the Class A shares? They were the elites. Did the ordinary Polias in the village get to buy Class A shares? No. It was the elites, predominantly sitting in Suva, who got to buy the Class A shares. Where the people who started the M-called supermarkets? Gone, disappeared, debts not paid off. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is a fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is that you help poor people based on their needs of who they are, not about their ethnicity, because invariably you cannot homogenize people in that basis. He talked about the Itoke people being poor. Of course some of them are poor. But of course at the same time they're Indo-Fijians. There are other groups in Fiji who are also poor. We don't go around saying this group of people should only be given assistance. No. We do it on a needs basis, Mr. Speaker, sir. That is the hard call. There was a study, Mr. Speaker, sir, done in the 1980s and 90s by the UN that said at that point in time that the Indo-Fijians were very poor because they're landless. Now you can go on harping on about ethnic groups, but what we are doing, what this Prime Minister has done under his leadership, he said we help people where there's a need. You may be helping a group of people at that point in time, they may be all 100% one ethnic group. Another point in time, 50%. It's done on a needs basis. That's the only way you can progress. It creates transparency, Mr. Speaker, sir. If we're going to do ethnic analysis, the Honourable Minister for Women has just spoken. She did not say and break down gender violence on the basis of ethnicity. She did it on the basis of gender. You don't actually help people, Mr. Speaker. Should your level of sympathy, should your level of sensitivity be based on who the victim is, based on the ethnic group? No. It should be based on the basis of you and them needing that particular assistance and you helping them. That is the reality, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I also wanted to make was that there was a number of comments, and again, Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Gerengere Tambua said, oh, you know, the Prime Minister and the AG always talk about us being like Singapore, and Singapore does ethnic analysis, and therefore that's why we should do it. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is such, you know, generalization. Singapore, Mr. Speaker, sir, Singapore, Mr. Speaker, sir, also buys water from Malaysia. Does that mean we buy water from Tonga now? Singapore uses its military to use the jungles in Indonesia and Malaysia. Do we do that now? Singapore has national service. Do we do that now? The point being that you don't generalize like that. The point being you need to have a more nuanced approach to understanding economics, understanding philosophy, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I wanted to also say, you see, the opposition, I was trying to think about how do I categorize them. I think they are the greatest obscurantists and obfuscators. Obscurantists, Mr. Speaker, sir, I'll tell you afterwards. Obscurantists, Mr. Speaker, sir, are people who deliberately hide facts. Mr. Speaker, sir, they deliberately hide facts. And obfuscators are people who try and cloud over facts. The greatest obscurantists and obfuscators, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir. Let me point out the philosophical hypocrisy by the other side, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, all of the members of SODELPA, when they joined this parliament, Mr. Speaker, sir, stood right over here, held up the Bibles, and swore to uphold the Fijian Constitution. They swore to uphold the Fijian Constitution, Mr. Speaker, sir. After saying Ameni Chisu so loudly, they are the first ones who now berate the Constitution. That's the level of hypocrisy that we see, Mr. Speaker, sir. How can you, Mr. Speaker, sir, trust a bunch of politicians? How can you trust a bunch of politicians who on one hand hold the Bible and swear to uphold the Constitution, but the next minute berate the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, sir? If they are so critical of it, they should not be here. They should not have participated in it. They should have not participated in elections. They should not have sworn. They should not have sworn a false oath. Should not have sworn a false oath. That's your problem. Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir. I was not going to comment. I was not going to comment on Honorable Gerengere Tambua's curse. A lot of people have said it. Mr. Speaker, sir. But what has actually prompted me to get into this debate, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that she defended herself when Honorable O'Connor yesterday spoke about it, and she said, I did not mean all children. In other words, she meant our children. She meant our children. And then, Mr. Speaker, sir, she went on to justify about the fact that children repay for the sins of their fathers by third and fourth generation by quoting numbers. That's the Old Testament, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, anybody that has a basic understanding of Christian theology, anybody that has a basic understanding of Christian theology and eschatology, Mr. Speaker, sir, would know that through the New Testament, I know more about religious studies than you, my friend. would know that the New Testament, Mr. Speaker, sir, through the theological belief of the resurrection of Jesus Christ and his love for everyone, everybody knows that the word belief in one and one person being held accountable for their own sins is what matters. To quote parts of the Old Testament selectively is actually, Mr. Speaker, sir, quite hypocritical. Because if she's going to quote all parts of the Old Testament, then eye for an eye matters. Eye for an eye matters. Tooth for a tooth matters. Eating of the flesh of swine matters. And that's from the Old Testament, Mr. Speaker, sir. So this is the level. Remember when Jesus Christ, when the woman was being stoned, and Christ said, if you have not sinned, then you cast a stone. Remember that? Remember that? Remember that? That's what you should understand. That's what you should understand, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir. They have been selective. There has been a barrage of attacks on the Honourable Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, sir. Sorry? Oh, yeah. There has been a barrage of attacks on the Honourable Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I think the Honourable members are riding high in what I call the SLR glamour train. The SLR glamour train. The SLR glamour train, and that glamour train, I'm telling you, and the shine is wearing off really quickly. And I remember some of our supporters, after the elections, the results of the last elections, were somewhat despondent about the results, saying with such a narrow margin. And I said to them, God works in mysterious ways. Yes. God works in mysterious ways. And I tell you why. Because today, the past 1 week, has been a perfect example of how you have demonstrated to all the Fijian citizens, and in particular voted for you, your inaptitude, your inability to run an effective government. And I tell you, Honourable Gavoka said we'll be the toast in the next elections. We will be the toast, God willing, we'll be toast of the town. That's what we will be. We'll be toast of the town, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir. Order. I want to also talk very quickly, extremely quickly, because the other side have continuously cited all the numbers, you know, because you've got this many 100 votes, therefore you're not legitimate. Let me give you some examples, and I've said this, I pulled this out from the Hansard. Mr. Speaker, sir, in the 2006 elections, SDL got only 44.6% of the votes and got 36-seat majority. There you go. Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, in 2001, Mr. Speaker, sir, the opposition received only SDL received only 26% of the votes, but it got a majority seats of 32. That's how the electoral system worked. Single member constituency. Donald Trump did not get majority of the votes of the Americans, but through the Electoral College votes has won the presidency. That's how the system works. That's what the system, no point harping on about it. You are there, we are here. As I said, we beat them 33-31. It was a win. That's the reality of it, Mr. Speaker, sir. That's the reality of it. The NFP, this is Johnny-come-lately party to the Parliament, Mr. Speaker, sir. In the last elections, they won, in the 2006 elections, they won 11.7% of the votes. But they did not win a single seat. They just crept over 5%. They won 3 seats in this election, Mr. Speaker, sir, under this system. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I want to also highlight, they go on about the 1997 Constitution. And very quickly, I want to highlight this point from a legal perspective. In the 1997 Constitution, the Itoke, we were divided along Itoke, Indo-Fijians, etc. Those days they called Indians, Fijian Indian seats. The Itoke people had 23 seats, of which 6 seats were reserved for what we call urban Itoke voters. Urban Itoke voters, Mr. Speaker, sir, in those days were about 42 to 45% of the entire Itoke population, but they got only 6 seats out of 23. That's the system they want to go to. I want all the urban Itoke people to understand what they're saying. What they're also saying, they want to go back. In those days, you voted along provincial lines. You voted along provincial lines. Each province got 1 seat, except Ba, Bakondrove, Tailevu. I want the people of Nandronga to know that Honourable Gavoka is saying it's okay for Namosi with 3,000 voters to elect 1 person and Nandronga with 19,000 persons to get only 1 voter. That's what I want them all to know. I want the people of Fiji to know that Honorable Nawaikula says my opinion does not matter because I'm young, even though I'm 54 years old. But as the Honorable Prime Minister highlighted, 70% of our population is below the age of 40. 50% is below the age of 27. I want our young people to know that Honorable Nawaikula and his party and his leadership don't value the ideas of young people. That's what he's saying. Because if I'm too young at 54, then what are they?
Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, point of order regarding the Honorable Minister of Economy is misleading the House. Misleading the House because nobody said what he is saying. We are just explaining the electoral systems, 97 and 2013, where the popularity of one person has taken all of them inside. Some of them got less than 1,000 votes. So he is misleading the House. Yeah.
Order.
Misleading it.
Order. Order. Your point is taken. Your point is taken. You have the floor. Huh?
Mr. Speaker, just before I get on to the economy also in detail, Mr. Speaker, sir, I think the greatest threat to the Itoke people, are the likes of members like Bulitavu and Nawaikula who spread DVDs and spells falsehood, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, do I have time? I'm told to stop. Mr. Speaker, sir, just very quickly on the economy. Mr. Speaker, sir, just very quickly on the economy. I just want to highlight, as you know, we've been told continuously there's no confidence in the economy, etc., Mr. Speaker, sir. But these are the very people who are trying to undermine the confidence. Mr. Speaker, sir, they don't understand. When they talk about economic analysis, Honorable Bulitavu talked about, etc., about the economy, at no stage did any one of them talk about the effect of Cyclone Winston. Wiped off 1/3 of the value of our GDP within 36 hours. We had a $500 million rebuild. They're shaking their heads as if they understand economics. Completely no understanding. A $500 million rebuild, Mr. Speaker, sir. Notwithstanding that, Mr. Speaker, sir, our debt to GDP ratio is far lower than what it's supposed to be. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Prasad, unfortunately, is not here. Tried to say the level of debt has increased greater to the level of our increment in GDP per capita. Completely false. Completely false, Mr. Speaker, sir. Honorable Nawaikula talked about FMIS. FMIS is up and running, Mr. Speaker, sir. Yes, it was down. It did not stop any payments. The payments were being made. We have in our bank sitting $150 million as I speak, Mr. Speaker, sir. There's no cash flow issue. They are the ones who are trying to create any disquiet in the economy, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I also wanted to make was one of the other key measures of measuring how well the economy is doing is to look at your inequality provisions. What do you call the Gini coefficient? The Gini coefficient. And Mr. Speaker, sir, Mr. Speaker, sir, Speaker, sir, the World Bank pointed out that Fiji is one of the 5 countries in the Asia-Pacific region, Mr. Speaker, sir, where inequality has actually dropped. There are many countries, Mr. Speaker, sir, whilst the GDP per capita has gone up, or the overall growth in GDP, but the inequality has actually increased. Fiji is one of the very few countries where inequality has actually decreased, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, the service delivery, of course, Honourable Rondo, you know a lot about service. Mr. Speaker, sir, I wanted to very quickly also, a very fundamental issue. It was very interesting, you know, I find them that they're so selective. When there is good news, the RBF gives good news, they say RBF is compromised. When the RBF has given a revised GDP growth, this RBF has said 1%. This is the kind of hypocrisy that we see, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, lastly, our inflation sits at, as we speak, minus 0.9%. Compared to October last year, the price of goods have overall come down, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point that I also like to make, when the economy slows down, a slower growth rate does not mean contraction. Please try and understand that basic idea. The economy is still growing. I have reached out to the members from the other side. I have a full list of the growth rates of the Fijian economy since independence, and you will see a track record. The point that we're trying to make about the 10-year growth is that it's a consecutive growth. If you see in the previous governments, yes, in some of the terms, Honorable Rambuka was there and Honorable Rotumara was there, there were growth rates for 5-6 years. That was the maximum it went to. And then it would go into negative growth, then positive growth, negative, negative, positive. What we are saying, when you have consistency in growth, it gives confidence to businesses. I just got off the phone this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, sir, with a business, and as we announced in the budget, we're building warehouses. There's about 5 or 6 companies that are building warehouses. It keeps the economy robust, Mr. Speaker, sir. These are made available, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I also wanted to say...
You have the floor.
Honorable Speaker, he's saying that there was negative growth. I have the figures here. There's no negative growth in during the alliance, during the SVT. There's no negative growth. It's here. This is from the Bureau of Stats. So where are you getting your figures from? So what I'm saying, there needs to be an independent assessment of your figure and our figures, because that's biased. And that,
Honorable members, Honorable Attorney-General, there was said point on before your point of order. There was negative growth, there was positive, there was negative, there was positive. Yeah. From his, obviously you two have a different list.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
You have time to finish.
I urge the honourable member to get these figures from us. These are official statistics. We cannot rely on the statistics you produce. Honourable Governor also produced some debt to GDP ratio, which is completely incorrect. Mr. Speaker, sir, last point I want to make, last point I would like to make as far as the economy is concerned, last point, Mr. Speaker, sir, with your indulgence, is that they talk about we have a consumption-led economy. Mr. Speaker, sir, they need to understand that we are not the economy of the 1970s and 1980s, where we what we call basically primary-based economy, where you had sugar, you had pine, you had fish. Mr. Speaker, sir, we now have other factors in the economy. We have tourism that contributes over close to 36% of our economy. Obviously, it's a services-driven sector. We have, Mr. Speaker, sir, a financial services sector. We have communications, food and beverage, accommodation. We have call centers now. All of these things are what we call services-driven sector that contributes to the overall GDP growth in the country. So they need to understand that we are not caught in the 1970s and 80s. They need to get with the program. We are currently talking to Silicon Valley. As announced, we're moving our Trade Commission office from LA to San Francisco to tap into the Silicon Valley. I met with 2 people who are helping us do coding courses here, so our young people can get into coding and into the ITC space. That's the new way of looking at things. Not you being caught up in how many people in that sector and sugarcane, this, that. Of course that is important, Mr. Speaker, sir. Of course, Mr. Speaker, sir. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, last point I want to make. Last point. Mr. Speaker, last point. Honorable Geringat Tambua, they talked a lot about that young 16-year-old who was allegedly harassed, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I want to get into the police. Last one. Mr. Speaker, sir. There was a case in 2000, it's called Epeli Senilolia versus Attorney General and Semi Voletti. Semi Voletti was a 14-year-old boy who was detained by police for 4 hours in an allegation of stealing tin tuna. He was handcuffed to a post outside the police post in Nandera. Mr. Speaker, sir, my point being that this what you're citing is not necessarily unique. The issue is, has it been dealt with or not? Are we dealing with it? There are police as we speak who have breached the law, they're being prosecuted. That's what we need to do. In countries like Australia and New Zealand, they do that. I can talk about Aboriginal deaths in custody. The point that we should be working towards in human rights cases, we need to collaborate, work together, whether there actually recourse available to the people who are the victims of crime. Last point about the police. Last point. They talk about the morale of the police. Morale of the police, Mr. Speaker, sir. Order. It's related to the police. Last point, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Geringat Tambua talked about the morale of the police being so low. I'll tell you when the decay set, Mr. Speaker, sir. When Honorable Sitiveni Rambuka carried out the coup in 1987, they locked up the Commissioner of Police, P.O. Raman, in his underpants in the cell at Suva Police Station. That's what they did. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the salaries of police constables in 2006 was $9,000 per year. Mr. Speaker, sir, today the salaries of police constables in 2019-2020 ranges from $16,000 to $18,000. We have a $125 million restructure that's taking place to help our police force modernize, Mr. Speaker, sir. No amount of head shaking, no amount of denying the facts. We have said continuously, we recognize what previous governments have done. You also have to recognize that under this Prime Minister, we have the greatest level of development ever taken place, unprecedented.